Chapter 19 Coming to America, in which Max plays his deadliest tune so far, and then finds his way to Fabletown to reunite with an old acquaintance. Max Piper visited America for the first time in the fall of 1918, in the wake of the Spanish influenza pandemic's second wave, the one medical authorities would later name the killer wave, once the total cost in human lives had been added up. He disembarked from his Argentinian passenger liner at Manhattan's Pier 61, within just a few dozen feet of where the heavy cruiser USS Seattle was moored, undergoing its refitting from a convoy escort into a troop transport, in anticipation of soon being able to bring the country's beloved doughboys home from the Great War. The four-stacked Seattle was a looming presence over the pier, its massive hull painted with dazzle paint, angry, knife-edged slashes of dark and light colors, designed to hide its true outline from the deadly German U-boats, which still prowled the Atlantic, even though America's top generals and war experts insisted, almost daily now, that the Hun's collapse was imminent. Max paused on the wharf to admire the warship's giant gun batteries, wishing he could see them fire. Guns were one of the things he liked most about the Mundy world, and the reason it had taken him an entire year to make it to New York after arriving in the world. First, he traveled the battlefields and devastated cities of the war like a giddy tourist, glorifying in the continent-wide abattoir that Europe was making of itself. But Max had finally, almost reluctantly, turned himself towards his true destination, coming to New York City's drab and mournful streets, dressed to party. He wore a red and white candy-striped silk suit jacket over purple slacks with golden pinstripes. Yellow spats topped his glistening patent leather shoes, and a jaunty straw boater topped his head, worn at just the perfect angle to properly convey his rakish charm to the new world. He carried no luggage, not requiring any, since he could magically conjure money, new clothes, and personal sundries into existence as he needed them, with only the most minimal effort, and often without any of the wearing after-effects that plagued him following a greater expenditure of power. He did bring one thing, though. He carried the flute called Fire openly, without covering or case, because he liked to have it always in hand, ready to play at any instant should the need arise. Max ignored the lines of black and green taxicabs clustered along the wharf, waiting to pick up arriving passengers, and instead set off into the city on foot. He wanted to explore among these amazing towers of steel and concrete and walk the famous avenues that sliced their ways between them. More important, he wanted to be among the people he was killing by the hundreds and sometimes the thousands every day. He'd wanted so much to be a part of the Mundy world's great time of destruction that he simply had to find a way to participate. No, he didn't create the nasty strain of swine flu virus that gave birth to the Spanish influenza. It had already existed in the Mundy world, lurking dormant, occasionally mutating, husbanding its deadly potential and biding its time. But what he had done was to compose a powerful and compelling anthem of death, which had inspired the long-slumbering bug to wake and respond to Max's call, eager to be his agent in the grim and mortal undertaking. For a while, Max let whim and caprice lead him on his journey into the heart of the city, going wherever the mood took him, having no specific plan or destination in mind for the day. Owing perhaps to the population's diminishment by disease and the staggering number of men and boys who'd gone off to the war, but more likely to the strict bans against public gatherings, the sidewalks were much less crowded than he'd expected. In Europe and in Argentina, he'd seen photographs and moving pictures that depicted New York City's residents packed together elbow to elbow. But here and now, there were pedestrians out and about, to be sure, but they kept a wary distance from each other, having been thoroughly indoctrinated that the influenza spread more easily in crowds. But, just as in the photographs, the city's streets were still packed with every possible sort of car and truck and other exotic motorized vehicle, constantly honking, growling and scolding each other in some indecipherable and arcane machine language. Perhaps their foolish drivers thought the glass and steel of their beloved automobiles protected them. Almost to a man, folks were dressed drably, in blacks, browns, and greys. Elegant clothes were viewed as an unjustified extravagance in these dark times, when everything not absolutely essential should be reserved for our boys overseas. The only exception to this dull and conservative trend was the surprising new direction in women's hemlines, which were tending decidedly upwards, but only because every inch of cloth saved from a civilian skirt translated into a little more material that could go to support the war effort. Max spotted one woman after another who was actually out in public with a scandalous 3 or 4 inches showing above her ankles. Of course, everyone was wearing white cloth masks. "They won't help," Max said to a random passerby. "My executioner is much too small to be filtered out by even the tightest weave of your ridiculous gauze and buttercloth constructions." "Excuse me?" the startled woman said, but Max had already gone on his way. Even in the daytime, much of the city was closed down. They were closed by order of the New York City Board of Health, signs on the doors of every school, church, theater, moving picture house, dance hall, and salon that he passed. A man on one corner was standing on an apple box, brandishing an open and unloaded shotgun above his head. "There's no medicine known to doctors that can stop the influenza," he cried, quite truthfully, whether he knew it or not. "But placing a shotgun under your bed will save you. The gun's fine steel will draw out the fever. It's been proven." Coincidentally, perhaps, the fellow was ready with pamphlets to hand out, directing customers to a nearby gunsmith's shop. Other impromptu street-side proselytizers broadcast their own ideas to fight the pestilence, with proposed cures ranging from hours of deep sweating to standing outside stark naked to inhaling the vapors from one woman's proprietary pepper stew recipe, copies of which were also available for a modest price. Each orator had a small crowd of spectators gathered around him, at least until roving police officers or civic-minded busybodies shooed them away, citing the ordinances against public gatherings. Max journeyed on, with a cockeyed smile on his lips and a jaunty kick to his stride. He ignored the rude stares he received from many passers-by, perhaps incited by his outlandish dress in these funereal times, or his blatant lack of a cloth mask. He couldn't say, nor did he care. The prettier ones among them received a tip of his boater in reply, which only seemed to increase the knife-edged looks of disapproval brandished at him. The street-level shop windows, whether on businesses open or closed, were plastered with all manner of bills and signs. Some exhorted citizens towards desired behavior, such as, "Open-faced sneezing is against the law. Report all open-faced sneezers." Other admonished him to "give to our boys in France tobacco fund." And still another, apparently willing to leave the specific details up to each reader, simply demanded, "do your share." A greengrocer, serving as an ad hoc satellite office of the Bureau of Labor, posted a huge outdoor banner that advertised for city-dwelling coloreds who were willing to relocate out to the country's farm belt states to replace field hands who had gone to war or died of the flu. A boy selling newspapers shouted, "Extra! Extra! Tahiti bills pyres of influenza dead!" He waved a copy of the special edition over his head, like a Jack Ketch swinging his deadly axe. In the street immediately adjacent, 4 masked and gowned women, Red Cross volunteers, were struggling to load a blanket-draped body into a city ambulance. "Have heart," Max said, sotto voce. "This time it's only the end of the world for some of you. I haven't yet learned to play fire well enough to usher in a full, worldwide apocalypse. But trust that I will, dear people. I'm dedicated, and I practice daily, so someday I will." Max took his supper at the elegant, but unpopular in these days of understandable rage against all things German, Kaiserhof restaurant, just across Broadway from the Metropolitan Opera House. Nearly alone in the large dining room, he ate a leisurely meal of assorted wursts and Bavarian-style potato salad while reading the paper. He noted that the Billy Sunday crusade was headed into town, and true to the afternoon paperboy's promise, things were indeed very bad in Tahiti. A full seventh of its major city, Papete's entire population had succumbed to the disease. Food and medicine was scarce, and the massive piles of the burning dead were everywhere. A country-by-country list of death totals were published on page 3, and the numbers were breathtaking. Well done, he congratulated himself. When the check arrived, he paid the exorbitant $1.25 fee with 2 glistening silver dollars, inviting the mildly astonished waiter to keep the change. Then he added, "But spend those quickly. They'll fade in a day or 2. The waiter dismissed the strange admonition, thinking the confusion was entirely his fault due to some defect in his admittedly shaky command of English, which was not his cradle tongue. Afterwards, Max emerged onto a still bustling Broadway, enjoying the cool of the afternoon. "Don't Try to Steal the Sweetheart of a Soldier" was playing softly from the broadcast speaker mounted outside of the Rexall drugstore a few doors down. With a full belly and content that he'd seen at least some of the effect his work had done in this greatest of all Monday cities, he decided to head uptown to be about the real reason for his visit to these shores. With a short dash, he was able to scramble aboard one of Broadway's electric trolleys, headed uptown, at full acceleration between 2 stops. Immediately, he was greeted with curses and catcalls, as well as actual blows from some of the other passengers standing close to him. "Where's your mask?" one of them yelled. Even the uniformed trolley operator shouted at him when he tried to pay the 6-cent fee, saying, "Don't you know it's against the law to board a New York trolley unmasked?" "But I have a mask," Max said, and suddenly it was true. A white buttercloth mask covered his mouth and nose, just like those worn by the astonished operator and his passengers. Every morning, Max played a tune of general conjuration, which he could make use of throughout the day, drawing on it incrementally, as a businessman draws upon his expense account. His skill with the magic flute had grown so acute over the ages that he no longer needed to play a separate tune for each small thing he desired. No one bothered him for the remainder of the ride. In fact, they backed away as far from him as the crowded coach would allow, leaving him a truly comfortable amount of room all to his own. Carrying fire with him, as always, he rode the merrily clanging Broadway trolley all the way to Columbus Avenue, transferring there to one of the city's last horse-drawn omnibuses, most of the horses having been taken away to the New Jersey countryside to help plow open-mass trench graves for disposal of the influenza dead. The omnibus brought him due north, paralleling Central Park, deep into the neighborhood called the Upper West Side, where he finally disembarked at 104th Street. Max walked from there, following Fire's gentle pull, leading him to where he would stay the night. He walked east along 104th, coming at last to Central Park and an impressive 4-story stone castle that overlooked it. The building was bordered on its 3 remaining sides by luxury apartment towers, but not so close as to intrude on its wide lawns and gardens. It was a single-family mansion called Twilight Castle, and J. Randolph Coppersmith, the infamous oil and steel tycoon, owned it. Max pondered the modern castle for a time, decided that it was fit to host him, and raised fire to his lips. The cloth mask that had covered his mouth dutifully disappeared back into the nothingness it was. He played a simple tune, and in no time at all, liveried servants, stout butlers, row upon row of maids and cooks, and 2 uniformed chauffeurs marched off the grounds, all in single file, and disappeared into the park. Just a few moments later, J. Randolph Coppersmith himself followed suit, marching at the lead of his pleasantly plump wife and 2 rotund children. Soon enough, they also vanished into the park. Max entered his new home and settled in for the night. He rose early the next morning, bathed, and fixed himself a hearty breakfast from the castle's well-stocked kitchen. Then he conjured a new set of clothes that were as gaudy as the previous day's ensemble. Leaving his old clothes behind to fade when they would, he set out on foot for Fable Town. He strolled south until he was in the 90s, and then west towards the Hudson River until he came to a small cross street, hardly more than an alley, called Bullfinch. Actually, he passed it several times at first, going back and forth along Anderson Street, being drawn one way and then the other by Fire's insistent pull, until at last he noticed the tiny Bullfinch Street and the tall grey woodland building which sat brooding like an ancient watchtower in its centre. "My name is Max Piper," he said to the uniformed security guard, who was quietly dozing behind a desk just inside of the Woodlands lobby. "I'm a lost fable, newly arrived in the Mundy world, and I'm here to join your community in exile." This was enough to startle the guard out of his slumbers. "Excuse me," the guard said, snorting and coughing himself into full wakefulness. He was short and slim. His uniform was grey and black, and he wore a revolver in a holster on his black patent leather gun belt. "Watch out," Max said. "Coughs and sneezes spread diseases, as dangerous as poison gas shells, or so the ubiquitous public notices claim." He smiled his most charming smile and doffed his hat with a flourish. "What did you say you wanted?" the guard asked. Looking deeper now, Max could see that this fellow wasn't human after all. Peering beyond the powerful illusion which surrounded the man like a cloak, he could dimly make out that the guard was in truth a large and fearsome bridge troll with rough, pinkish skin and deadly yellow fighting tusks. "Call your superiors, my good creature. I'm here to sign up." In scant time, 2 actual human fables, in fact as well as appearance, were summoned to the lobby. They were a lovely woman and an older gentleman. She introduced herself as Snow White, first assistant to the other fellow whom she identified as Ichabod Crane, the deputy mayor of Fabletown. After the introductions were settled, they invited Max up to one of the building's guest suites, where they could all be more comfortable while they worked things out. "You don't have an office?" Max said as they rode the modern caged elevator skyward. "We do," Ichabod explained, "but it's off limits to all but our own people, of which I'm the latest." "Perhaps," Snow said, "but that remains to be determined." Once they were settled into the promised suite, Snow White immediately got down to business, even though the gangly and bespectacled Ichabod seemed content to hem and haw for a goodly while longer. "Will you tell us more about who you are and how you escaped the Homelands?" Snow said. She had pale skin and night-dark hair, which she wore pulled back into a severe bun that allowed not the slightest strand free to dangle and play in any stray breezes the day might bring. She was dressed in dull brown, and though her skirt hem was as high as the current style demanded, her long-laced canvas and leather spectators prevented any chance of the slightest hint of bare leg showing. In response to her request, Max narrated a truncated and mostly fictional account of his history up until his arrival in the Mundy world. He omitted any mention of his conflict with Peter, nor his dealings with the Hamlin of the Hesse. "He's lying," a voice said from behind him, once Max had concluded his story. Max turned to see that an old woman sat behind him in a rocking chair that occupied one corner of the room that he would have sworn was empty when they'd first arrived. She had steel grey hair, and her face and hands were a symphony of wrinkles and rines. She wore a faded print dress of small white flowers against a green field. She knitted from a straw basket in her lap as she rocked gently back and forth. "Frau Totenkinder, I didn't know you'd be joining us," a flustered Ichabod said. He scrubbed frantically at his glasses with the end of his black necktie. "I hadn't planned to," Totenkinder said, "but dear old Max got my attention when he arrived.
I've past history with the man that I thought you should be made aware of before you do anything rash, like invite him to sign our compact."
"I've never seen this person in my life," Max said.
"Not like this,"
Toten kinder said.
"I was younger and prettier when you borrowed that flute from me."
"Oh,
"It's you,"
Max said, and his eyes narrowed, perhaps to conceal the dangerous look that stealed their way into them. "Once again I have to remind you that fire isn't yours, it's mine."
"Only in the sense that you've managed to prevent me from taking it back so far,"
she said.
"Yes,"
Max said.
"I could feel you tugging at it over the years, but it's happy in my possession and not likely to abandon me for more centuries spent sitting ignored on a shelf. Fire likes to play and create among the myriad worlds. It has no love of rest and idleness."
"I don't understand what's going on between the two of you," Snow interrupted. "But one thing's for certain. If we accept you into our community, you wouldn't be allowed to keep any dangerous magic implements you bring with you. I assume this fire the two of you refer to is the flute you carry?"
"It is, but—"
"Then you will have to surrender it for storage in our business office," Snow continued. "One of the non-negotiable conditions of Fabletown's citizenship is that all magic items spirited out of homelands are held communally for the use and benefit of all of us."
"A sensible ordinance,"
Max said with a crafty smile.
"And one which I'll gladly obey. Of course, among its many virtues, fire is indeed, as you've surmised, a dangerous weapon. More than once it's saved me from a tough scrape with the Empire's forces. But since no Imperial troops rule here, in this cozy island of peace and refuge, I don't need a dangerous weapon any more, do I? However, in the interest of public safety, I'd need to train someone in the proper means of handling and storing it, which might take some time. There's no end to this reptile's deception,"
Toten kinder said.
"If the two of you can't see he's lying, then I fear for our future under your administration. Max Piper has no intention of surrendering his flute. I believe his sole purpose in attempting to join Fabletown is so that he can learn the whereabouts of his brother, Peter, one of the few secrets that are beyond fire's powers to reveal."
"Oh, is my brother here?" Max said.
"I had no idea. But yes, if that's the case, of course I want a reunion with him. Families should be together, but we've been kept apart from each other for too long. He tried to kill Peter in the past and plans to try again,"
Toten kinder said.
"My understanding is that all sins of the past are washed away once I sign the Fabletown Compact. Is that not the case? If not, then there are many past deeds this witch has perpetrated that you should be made aware of."
"Past crimes are forgiven and forgotten," Ichabod said, "but any new ones, after signing the compact, are dealt with harshly." Snow leapt in to add,
"I promise you'll find my repentance is deep and sincere,"
Max said. "Then we'll adjourn this matter until we've had a chance to discuss it," Ichabod said. "Max, you can stay here for the night as our guest, and we'll let you know of our decision in the morning."
"Lovely," Max said. "Wonderful. But there's no need to put me up like some freeloader off the streets. I've secured my own lodgings while in town. Just tell me when you want to see me in the morning, and I'll be here."
That evening and late into the night, the witch and the two Fabletown officers discussed Max's application for citizenship. They held the debate in the mayor's penthouse residence, high on top of the Woodland building, with King Cole, the mayor, joining in the discussion. The arguments went round and round, as arguments will. Totenkinder was steadfastly against it. Snow expressed a wary need of caution, while Ichabod Crane and King Cole questioned, dithered, and dissembled, as they often did when hard decisions were in the offing. But finally King Cole resolved himself and said, "I believe I understand all of the reasons why we shouldn't trust this Mr. Piper, but the universal amnesty is the single foundation on which all of Fabletown rests. If we deny membership to one man based upon what he's done in the past and what we fear he may do in the future, then the house of cards we've built may come tumbling down around us. Fabletown is a fragile experiment in a new way of living, where a pauper and a king enjoy equal freedoms and responsibilities. One misstep could end it. I believe, in the final analysis, we have to treat Max Piper just like we did Bigby and you, Frau Totenkinder, and even me. Each of us committed terrible crimes and shameful deeds in the old worlds. We all came damaged and sinful into this new world, and only prospered as much as we have together through borrowed grace. None of us deserved our place in Fabletown. Instead, it was a gift we gave to each other. Barring unimpeachable evidence that he plans to further harm Peter or his poor wife, or any other of us, I can't see any way we can avoid giving this man the same chance to start over that each of us have been granted. When he returns tomorrow, we have to let him sign the compact and receive the general amnesty." And so it was decided. But later that same night, while Max slept peacefully in his stolen castle, a visitor appeared quietly in his bedroom. She made no sound, but nevertheless Max awoke before she could cross the room and remove fire from where it lay next to him on that large bed that seemed to cover acres of floor. "I thought you might try a midnight visit," Max said, coming fully awake in an instant. He lifted fire, sat up in the bed, and regarded her in the night-shrouded chamber. "I can't let you sign the compact tomorrow," the witch said. She still looked as old as she'd seemed the afternoon before, but now there wasn't a hint of frailty about her. She stood thin and small in the center of the floor, but this time there was a sense of weight and solidity attached to her, radiating invisibly but substantially from her. "And I can't let you stop me," he said, "unless you're ready to tell me where my brother and his miserable broken little wife have hidden themselves. In that case, I'd be willing to settle old matters with them alone and be on my way, like the proverbial happy wanderer, never to darken the woodland's door again." "I don't think I'll do that," she said. "Instead, I think I'll do what I should have done ages ago and rid the world of you, rid all the worlds of you. At long last, I've finally learned that one can't bargain with monsters. They simply need to be destroyed when discovered." Max stood up. "You can't beat me," he said. "Fire's too strong, and I'm its master." "And you've wandered into my place of power," Totenkinder said. "I've had centuries here to prepare the ground." Tendrils of long, dormant enchantments yawned into life and began to tickle the air around her, invisible to anyone but these two. "I can read the protections layered around you as if I'd written them myself. And I know what you've done and continue to do in this world. The plague you've unleashed. That was power ill spent, Max Piper. Because though it's killed and continues to kill many a Mundy, it's had no effect on Fables." "You think so?" he said. "Yes, my gift to the world kills many of the weak dullards who people this world. But that was just a side effect of its true purpose. They weren't its real target. I trained my influenza to affect Fables in a different way, and it's already done its work among you.
Don't you know me by now, witch? I don't kill outright when I can attack you through your offspring. My bug has wormed its way in and taken all of your children away from you. Not those you've already had, but those you might have had from now on. Fabletown is barren, old woman, from this day forward. Call it the most oft-repeated motif in the never-ending concerto of my life. I steal children, that's what I do. That's what you created me to do. Then that's what I'll undo when I take fire back from you. The witch spread her thin arms and gathered all of her fell powers around her. Max raised fire to his lips, but he was too late. Outside, over the past hour, black storm clouds had piled up over the city, building in fury. Now they released it. 10,000 windows shattered from the thunderblasts, and hard rain pounded down from the heavens. The fevered and infirm thrashed in their sick beds, crying out from nightmares, and then died in greater numbers that night than ever before. A dozen fires were started by lightning strikes throughout the 5 boroughs. Murders and suicides increased by a factor of 10, and 100 other deaths were attributed to inexplicable acts of God. But no god played any part in them. Every calamity in the city was caused by the overflow of dark energies emanating from a grey stone castle on Central Park. The battle lasted for hours, and the forces it unleashed spilled over into other worlds as well. Great strongholds shuddered and cracked, releasing ancient and fearsome beasts, things long bound and imprisoned, to wander again through dark lands, feeding and destroying wheresoever they went. Ripples of terrible possibility spread out from the battle's epicenter, birthing new horrors that had never existed before. By dawn, long after the spent storms had dissipated, city firemen found the castle named Twilight had been razed, while its former occupants, masters and servants alike, were discovered more than a mile away, huddled together, dead in the park. The firemen uncovered evidence that a fire had blazed so hot through the night that the mansion's stones themselves had begun to burn. And most bizarrely, at the center of the destruction, they found a little old lady in a green print dress, unconscious but unharmed. It was more than a year before she woke up. In that time, she'd been identified by relatives with impeccable credentials who quietly had her transferred to a private clinic in town. Her first words upon waking were, "I couldn't beat him." Later, among those most trusted in Fabletown, she'd had the opportunity to elaborate. "He was too strong, so ultimately the best I could do was to open a door that sent him tumbling into the deepest abyss and then far away through the farthest netherworlds. He'll likely be a long time finding his way back, but he will return, for I fear nothing in any realm can harm him now." Then she remarked, "And know now that it'll be much worse the next time, because he sampled all that I could bring against him. Even as I kept his own attacks at bay, I could perceive him studying mine, learning from them." The last dreg of the influenza had played itself out in the meantime. Armistice was signed in Europe, the boys came home, and all of the nations of the world vowed to make war no more, because at last it had grown too terrible to contemplate. In Fabletown, few children were conceived, and those that were delivered stillborn in horrifying shapes of deformation. Frau Totenkinder, the Black Forest Witch, along with her sorceress colleagues on the woodland's 13th floor, worked for decades to undo the curse. In time, nearly a century later, she developed a potion which she contrived to place in the hands of a scoundrel, knowing he'd use it, not entirely understanding it, against his perceived enemies, the great wolf and his one true love. 9 months later, 7 live children were born to them. "That's a good start," she said to her associates, "but both of them were among the most highly magical of our community. The wolf is the offspring of one of the most powerful of the gods, while his woman occupies the center of countless fateful crossings in the primordial magic flow. I suspect their own enchanted natures strove to help the remedy along. So though we can consider ourselves on the right track, we've still much work to do to perfect a lasting and universal cure. And up at the farm, Peter and Bo lived their lonely lives together in their remote home, always waiting, without always realizing it, for word that his brother had returned.